and welcome to another week of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with my co-host, Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos, what's going on?
Shawn, my friend, I am feeling like I thread the needle this last weekend between work responsibilities, life, parent, wife responsibilities, and GenCon. And
yeah.
I am thankful for that GenCon. I feel like it infused me with the energy I needed to survive that gauntlet I just went through.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I miss in-person conventions so much is because often they do, as tiring as they make you, recharge you. And the online versions of these events just drain me more. Even if I have fun, it's just more time in front of the computer, more time online. So it's hard for me to do that and get that adrenaline coming out of it, ready to take on more work. So I did participate last night, which we will talk about in the news a little bit. But I didn't get any games in because I was working all weekend. So it was just, I need that Gamehole Con, coming up in 3 weeks. I need to be there surrounded by people with masks and vaccinated, but surrounded by people to bring this, bring this joy of this hobby back to me. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, it is really interesting following everything. And I looked at all those pictures closely of GenCon and in addition to, the much publicized picture shared around a lot that Chris Pramis took of everybody kind of filing into the dealer's hall, which looked very nightmarish. There were also pictures of people at tables where I would see well, that mask is below that person's nose, and it's just enough to kind of I really want an only vaccinated situation when I'm seeing those kinds of things. But
it's true, and that's what we'll get at Gamehole Con, fortunately. Yeah. So we'll keep looking forward to that. But in the meantime, there is a ton of gaming and D&D news. The first bit of news is I just sort of want to recap more for myself than for listeners even on what the release schedule is for Wizards of the Coast for 2021.
I think that's wise.
Yeah, and I'm not even getting into the non-book products. I'm just talking about the books that are coming out. So we are recording on the 20th of September. So tomorrow, the 21st of September. And by the time this show drops, The Wild Beyond the Witchlight will be officially released. I pre-ordered mine on D&D Beyond, and they're telling me that it's available tomorrow. So I will be there ready to read it tomorrow. On the 19th of October, so in a month, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons releases. And then the month later, on the 16th of November, we get Strixhaven, A Curriculum of Chaos. So we've been sort of covering bits and pieces of these news items about these things. And to me, they became a big jumble. Yeah. I would have sworn that Strixhaven came first with the more coverage of that than of sort of everything else that led up to it. So it helped me just to get my mind around this release schedule.
Yeah, if somebody had held a weapon to my head, a crossbow to my head, and said, state the order in which these release, I would have ran out the room rather than try to answer. Is what I would have done.
Exactly, I would have been way off on all of them, or I said, aren't they all released tomorrow? Seems reasonable. So that is the release schedule. So for those of you who are looking forward to all the new goodness is coming. And then there are other things, obviously, DM Screen, Dungeon Kit, those sorts of products will also be released. And we'll cover those as they come out, but I wanted to sort of get my ducks in the proverbial row here.
I'm excited to go to my gaming store tomorrow and pick up stuff.
Yep. There you go. GenCon has taken place, as we talked about. Teos and I were on Owlbear Soup. So it was sort of a combined Mastering Dungeon Owlbear Soup production where we covered some news and then we created an adventure. And I sort of ducked out before the adventure could be finished. But it was kind of fun, to get together with Richard and Justin and talk about games and talk about creating games. It's fun.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone who came on there. I thought we came up with a really cool adventure. I could easily, if that adventure, went through a couple of passes and went out, I would be very happy with that kind of experience. I thought it was a really neat idea.
Yeah, doing that always reinforces in me the collaborative power of creation.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, good time there. What else did you do or see when you did your Gen Con experience?
Yes, I played a game of Numenera. That was really fun. DM David was there, so
Nice.
that was fun to see. And it was his first time playing Numenera. He shared a sort of fun story about how he told his son before the game, yeah, the DM doesn't roll anything. And I think his son said something like, well, how's the DM have fun? Or, some angle like that. But everybody else at the table other than me, it was their first time playing Numenera, which is great. Here's a Gen Con online game. You're pulling in lots of new people. It's exactly what, Monte Cook Games would want.
Right.
Then I played Call of Cthulhu. This was the case where I think I was the only person who had not played this edition. I have briefly played a very older edition. I've somehow just in my life just keep missing playing lots of COC, even though it's I like the concept a lot. And so I was very impressed by the latest iteration of the rules, which were a lot like old rules, but add some nice little bits. It was just a 2-hour scenario, like a learn to play. And yeah, it was great. I did things very poorly. Really all weekend long, I rolled extremely poorly. Like I had, both games have reroll mechanics. And in both cases, I managed to get the same thing I had gotten before.
Nice.
Again. And I did that 3 times during the weekend. So I was just fairly spectacular.
Yeah.
And then I went to the seminar for 13th Age Build a Monster. It was super cool. If you've never seen that, it doesn't matter whether you know 13th Age or not. You will appreciate this. I'm sure it'll be on YouTube, and past years are on YouTube. And it's a super helpful look at the design of monsters and the same creative, collaborative thing we're talking about. We came up with a really wild monster between the people in chat and all the brilliant designers that were there. It was super neat. Yeah, and then the owlbear soup thing was just so much fun. I had a blast of that.
Yep. One of the things I wish I could have been at but couldn't was the conclusion of the Moonshae Isles campaign that was Adventurers League compatible, that was run by Baldman Games. Eric Mengi brought a very difficult project to wrangle to a wonderful conclusion, if any of the rumors that I've heard are true. So you can pick up many of those adventures. I think there are something like 14 trilogies already up on the guild, as well as some one-off products. And then the rest of the campaign will be available out and about where Baldman Games runs its games, and then it'll be up on the DM's Guild. So, congratulations, Eric, and all the Baldman Games team on putting together a really memorable campaign. In other news, we have the
Actually, before
D&D...
you go move forward,
yeah.
I had a question. Is Moonshae then going to have another story arc?
I don't know. I know that they are going to be tied in to an upcoming campaign,
okay,
but I don't know if it's set in the Moonshaes or if Baldman Games is moving to a new area.
Because I recall at one point Tony Winslow Brill was going to be taking over the reins of the Moonshaes, but it may be that with all the changes to AL, those plans change. So we'll have to look into that and see. I'll reach out to Tony and ask. We can.
Yeah, I know that the Baldman Games and maybe even the Game Hole Publishing is going to have like a special relationship with Adventurers League in terms of the content they're creating and where it fits into the campaign. But I don't know if all of the details have been released or if some of the details that I had heard earlier have changed. But I know there's going to be something special going on there.
Okay, cool.
And that leads us to next weekend's gaming, which is the D&D Celebration. If you wanted to play D&D a lot, because Origins is coming up the weekend after that, you have your chance to play a lot of games. So the D&D Celebration obviously is going to look at Wild Beyond the Witchlight and its release, and as well as giving some looks into Fizban's Treasury of Dragons and Strixhaven. There's going to be panels, there's going to be live stream games, and there's going to be a chance for you to play in online games. So, all of that's coming. Teos, did you have any details on anything noteworthy there?
Yeah, so last week they released the schedule of all the events that are taking place. You can still sign up for some games for D&D Celebration. A lot of them are full, but you can get previews of the AL Witchlight Adventure and the Epic. I think there are still some seats available for those. So if you go out to that dndcelebration.com, you can join in the fun. I've signed up for some of that. Then all this week they've got previews by various folks they've chosen from the Twitter world who will share excerpts of various kinds. There's going to be something on Thursday that's preview-ish, and then really it starts the 24th to 26th, where really we have Celebration, and there's a full slate of panels and streams. Some of the cool ones: Friday, 10 a.m., these are all Pacific times, Intro to the AL. Love it that they're starting with that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
11 a.m., a streamed game featuring cast members from Star Trek Discovery with special guest Will Wheaton.
Nice.
And he's been kind of withdrawn from the scene, so it's neat to see him come back into this.
Yep.
Then, sometimes you like different folks like different things. Like maybe you like to watch the streams. Maybe you want the hard news. So 3 p.m. is your first peek at that, where Chris Perkins, Stacey Allen, and Will Doyle, the main designers, discuss the adventure.
I think that's great.
Yes.
I've been waiting for, counting on my fingers and toes, 20 plus years, because I only have 10 fingers and 10 toes, 20 plus years to see them actually talk to the people that designed the adventure. And, and hopefully we will have Will and Stacey on this show in a couple of weeks to do the same thing, to discuss the adventure.
Yeah, you're right. And it reminds me when I first saw, I don't remember if it was Tomb of Annihilation, and I think it was Storm King, that I saw a map and I'm like, wow, that really looks like Stacey and Will's style. Mm-hmm. And it feels like they're designed too. And then Tomb of Annihilation, I'm like, wait a minute, this has got to be them.
Right.
And it was like, I don't know if they weren't credited or it was a very small thing, but then you start learning like, wow, they were a big part of this. And so to now see them get to the point where like, okay, they're getting that kind of, spotlight, that's great because they deserve it. They're incredibly talented. So I'm glad that will happen. All right. So Saturday, there's a 10 a.m. panel on how to bring young players into D&D. 11 a.m. is a Strixhaven discussion. That's where Amanda Hammond, Jeremy Crawford, and James Wyatt will break down that book. 2 p.m. is a similar discussion of Fizzbands with James Wyatt. 4 p.m. is the Circus of Sound, a D&D musical.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
What could possibly go right?
Yeah, that sounds lovely. And then Sunday, there's a 3 p.m. panel, Future of D&D. This has been very useful in the past years, very exciting to see what they say. Ray Winninger, Liz Shue, Chris Perkins, Jeremy Crawford, all talking about what might be on the horizon. And then there's a whole number of other silly, exciting streams, panels, things like that. So if you look at that schedule on dndcelebration.com, you can see all that and pick the ones you want to watch.
Yeah, there's really literally something for everyone.
Yeah.
Whether you're into live streams, panels, news, silly things, it's all great. And it's all there at dndcelebration.com. And of course, if you want to play the games, Baldman Games is again doing their thing, and from Thursday through Sunday you can play a variety of games, including, as Teos said, the new season's Intro Adventure and Epic. So check that out. There's this little thing called the Diana Jones Award, which every year goes to some deserving new up-and-coming or different designers or themes or something in the game industry. And this year the winner was a Nigerian board game company called Nibcard. And Teos has more information on that.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Diana Jones Award, from its funny story of this like rescued remnant of an Indiana Jones RPG cover, to just how they approach things with the sort of almost secret society of smart RPG designers who come together with just wild things. They can be concepts, they can be people, companies, you name it. So it's a very, very different type of award, and I think very meaningful because of how it's created. They're really looking at things that are impactful. And in this case, Nibcard is a company that's helped create a board game business in Nigeria and in really all of West Africa. They've helped create 33 different board game titles and basically taken it from 0 to 100 on the creation of board games in Africa, right? Just really accelerated it. They've organized, I think starting in 2016, an annual board game convention to springboard growth in that area. So it was a neat to see that spotlight on a different part of the world that we don't think about as being a huge board game source, but is growing due to these initiatives. Mm-hmm. And then they have an emerging designer program where they name several individuals as finalists, similar to the main award. And in this case, the winner was Jian Shim. She is the co-creator of Field Guide to Memory, which I participated in through Kickstarter. Really neat idea where you get sort of daily emails telling you about things that happened, notes you sent yourself from the future as the one. And then she's done similar other innovative RPGs and games sort of along those lines. So really well deserved, because that's just that kind of thinking that I think stimulates a lot of game designers to do things differently and move beyond the normal concepts of what we think of as an RPG.
Yep. Awesome. In addition to the Diana Jones Award, the ENnie Awards were announced, and there were several big sweeping winners. And again, Teos brings us the details.
Yeah, so Renegade Studios really wins a lot this year with their silent RPG. That is, folks, You Don't Talk. Alice is Missing. That won Best Game, Product of the Year, and several other awards. Then Swedish publisher Free League also won several awards, including the Fan Favorite Publisher Award. They made Alien. They've made several other really good games, and then they publish other games as well from other people. That's a big move forward for them. This felt to me sort of like many years ago, Pelgrane Press won this kind of level of awards and really got attention. And so I think this is one of these things that sort of cements Free League and Renegade Studios. Also, the Brancalonia Spaghetti Fantasy Setting Book got silver for Product of the Year and several other awards. And this is a 5e D&D setting that's based on Italian folklore and Italian history by an Italian company called Acheron Books. That's really cool. And then several awards won by Heart, the City Beneath. This is an RPG by Rowan Rook and Descartes. Won Best Setting, silver for Best Game, won Best Writing, and won Best Layout and Design. So a couple of these games really resonated heavily with first the judges that choose these, and then the voters that were selecting them. We've talked about this before. The ENnies is a kind of very imperfect award thing in that dichotomy between judges picked it and then fans pick it. You never know what you're going to get at the end compared to what you started with, but it is still a great way to spotlight new companies, and so it still does its purpose.
Yep, and you can find that at ENnie-awards.com. Switching over to sort of industry news, there was an interesting Twitter thread and then several follow-ups revolving around Paizo. So earlier this week, Paizo fired 2 key customer support staff, and this resulted in an outcry from people saying that they had been doing excellent work and that the firing was motivated by something other than, their work. So Jessica Price, who was a former employee at Paizo and has spoken out against Paizo's higher level personnel, came on Twitter and said, now that the people that I was sort of protecting by not speaking out are gone, I'm going to speak out. And she did speak out. She shared accounts of lots of business practices that people found very questionable. Some of the behavior of higher level employees, including things like sexual harassment. She disclosed, and the backlash against Paizo was noticeable. Several people canceling their subscriptions and calling for resignations, and that whole thing that happens when truth or perceived truth gets uncovered. And we have to obviously say that there's always three sides to every story. Your side, my side, and the truth. So then other Paizo employees stepped in and gave some feedback, some things that they agreed with or disagreed with, and it became a public airing of grievances and of taking sides and giving explanations. And I guess recently Paizo was able to respond.
Yeah, so they tried responding. Their first response was fairly bad by most accounts, bringing some very funny. If you still had the people that you fired, they could have fixed this statement for you. That was hilarious. But it was sort of we're at GenCon and so we can't focus, but these are our core values. There's now another update from Jeff Alvarez, who is one of the people that the thread goes into great detail about, saying that they're going to, they take everything very seriously, that this does not match their values, and they're going to be speaking to managers and staff and trying to work on improving situations. But I think that there are a couple things that come out of this. I mean, there's the granular level of these accusations, which are corroborated by several other people, and I think reflect what many of us who are in the industry have heard across years. Mm-hmm. And Paizo has sort of managed to project one thing while there's this undercurrent of discussion about other things. And that may happen to some extent at any company, but I think it had gotten to the point where it's not surprising to see things like this come out. Mm-hmm. And even if we may disagree on any particular point, what is the truth, what is someone's perspective, it's clear that adjustments should be made.
Yeah.
On the other side, what really resonated to me with like the hashtag Paizo accountability that's out there and all of this is that we are at the point, and I think this is a good thing, where you may be able to get away with some number of years of operating in certain ways, but it will probably get out in today's day and age, and it will result in this sort of problem. And so they're probably, hopefully companies will see from this, all companies, not just Paizo, will see that one should operate differently and have better practices, because it's not only the wrong thing to do, but it will financially hurt you in the end. And this is terrible timing for Paizo, right? I mean, they're trying to make big announcements of various initiatives they have. This happens right when they're at GenCon, which is typically a time when they make a lot of big announcements. And so it all really hurt their landing at a time when they really need to win people over to their second edition. Mm-hmm. So other companies take note, right? It's a good time for every company out there to take a look inside and say, what are we doing that someone could post about, right?
Yeah. Yep. Any company in the long run reflects the morality and ethos of their leadership.
Yeah.
And, while individual employees can be wonderful people and do wonderful work, if there's problems at the top, they will trickle down.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and I'm sure we'll see more of it with more other companies in the future. We've seen it with several companies in the past.
Yeah.
And so, it's just an interesting. It's interesting that a game design, role-playing game design company, in this day and age, is, under this sort of scrutiny, and is being held accountable for actions of the past.
Yeah, but I think that the type of accusations, I mean, I say funny because it's quirky. There's a story that she tells about the carpet not being replaced and how the carpet had been there for years, never cleaned, and it's causing people to feel like they can't breathe, and it's having health implications, which is a thing, right? It's a scientific thing from when those kinds of situations. And it's shared as an example because she has such a documented. We reached out and asked for this, and we asked again, and we tried, and like they're almost running like a guerrilla warfare campaign to try to get this carpet cleaned and replaced or fixed or whatever, and how management is reacting to that, and that is a systemic problem, right? This is a concrete example that sounds sort of silly, like the carpet, but it shows if you have management fighting employees and sort of pushing them off and obfuscating what's going on and every person trying to prove that they're a yes person to the manager above them and therefore doing nothing, right? That's a bad situation and companies can get that way. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. If you are operating that way, there will be big problems down the road.
Yep, exactly. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. So, and speaking of sort of controversial company decisions, Critical Role has clarified its intellectual property use. So, like any large company, Critical Role, let the fans basically do what the fans wanted, and they were creating fan art and they were creating all sorts of things based on Critical Role IP, and Critical Role was everyone's friend until you get into the business side of things. And then especially if you're going to say have a show on Amazon, the rules kind of change a little bit. So Critical Role put out a statement about how their intellectual property could be used. And since it limited fans in some ways, barely limited fans in some ways, it was met with the typical outcry of sellout or, why are
money
you stepping
grubbing
on my creativity? Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. When it's just, welcome to living in the world.
Yeah.
So they've clarified their IP use rules.
Yeah. And they also have filed various trademarks, which can be seen on the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. None of it's absurd. I mean, it's the name of their characters and their worlds and things like that. But they're taking that step because what unfortunately can happen legally is that if a company allows wide use of what could be its trademarks and doesn't enforce them at all, then it can legally lose those, right? And you can have a situation where somebody could make a book about a certain part of your world. And then if you want to make that part of the world, that other entity could claim that you can't. And it's your world, right? You could reach that level legally if you don't sort of stake your claim to it. So what they basically said was, hey, can you do commercial stuff? No. I mean, it's our stuff. You can't just, commercially make things. Can passive revenue be allowed? Like I'm making a YouTube show where I talk about what happened on Critical Role. Yeah, you can do that. You can make the money that YouTube gives you because you're talking about us or something like that. Can you use our logos and trademarks? Generally, no. It's all, I thought, very straightforward, very reasonable, and just things companies have to do.
Yep. It's true. So all that is there at critroll.com. A new issue of Arcadia is coming out, and it has 3 new and amazing articles. First is Subclasses of the Hag by Jessica Markram. We have Monstrous Components by V.J. Harris, and then The Emerald Exchange by Bianca Bickford.
Yeah, these all look great. I've had a sneak peek that we got for the show. The Monstrous Components is great. The Emerald Exchange is really, they're all fantastic as if you've seen Arcadia issues before. Beautiful art, really good writing. I was really glad to see Bianca's work in this episode. She does so many neat things, as we'll talk about further.
Yep. So that will be coming out shortly. Speaking of new releases, we have a new release by MT Black. I'm always following MT Black because he was one of the first people to make a name for himself via this new medium called the DMs Guild.
Yeah.
And he was probably one of the most successful folks to do that. And so you follow his career, and now he's actually moving off the DMs Guild and into drive-through RPG creation to save that 20% that you would normally have to give to Wizards of the Coast if you publish on the DMs Guild.
And importantly, you can also publish elsewhere. which gives you a lot of, right? So it's not only do you get a better cut, but you also have the flexibility to sell it in different ways. The other thing that MT Black has talked about, and as you said, he's often been a person who tells us, sort of wakes us up to smart realities and smart moves. Yeah. There are all these tools that OBS has only on the drive-through side and not on the DM's Guild side. Things like how it creates a mailing list for you when you send out an adventure to people who buy it. And now you can use that mailing list to promote your next product. But you don't have that on the DM's Guild, right? And there's no reason why it shouldn't exist, but it doesn't. And so, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So he has a new release called The Secret of Strangelight Hall, an adventure for 5th edition, designed for characters of 1st to 4th level, optimized for 5 characters of APL 3. It takes place in the world of Iskandar, which is a campaign setting that MT has created, although you can easily transfer it to other worlds. So that is available. It seems like a pretty cool tier 1 low-level adventure for sort of a 1 to 2 shot campaign, and he creates great stuff. So you can check that out if you wish.
Yeah, and mirroring what we talk about, MT Black believes a lot in easy to run. Right.
Yes.
So he says, again, requires minimal preparation to run. And I believe it because he has always done really well at that aspect of things.
And the final product we're going to highlight, speaking of Bianca Bickford, is called Acererak's Collection of Complex Traps. It contains 13 complex traps for tiers 1 through 3. It was collected from submissions to the Dungeon Masters Challenge, which will wrap up at D&D Celebration next weekend. So this was produced by Bianca and edited by Kat Kruger, and it has these traps, these complex traps that people turned in. They collected, the best of them, took the 13 that they wanted, and put them out as a book. And we knew this was probably going to happen.
Yeah.
So it was only a matter of time. And did you have any of the traps you wanted to highlight?
Well, a couple of things. Yeah. So I did like a number of them. I mean, the traps cover a really nice range. Like there's one that's like, you're going to be fed to a giant frog because you're reduced in size. You're going to fall through a grate. What do you do? I mean, that's wild, right? Another one, you're trapped in a classroom and it has, these various things you must figure out about the classroom and what was being taught and what past students failed at and things like that. Bianca has a trap that's really cool. That there are low-level traps, high-level traps. There's no way you're going to look at this book and not say, oh, that one, I'm going to use that one in a thing, right? Like there's enough variety that it will please anybody. If you want really complicated, if you want, complex, but still easy to drop in, like there's a great variety. The designer names, there are a lot of familiar names, people that I dig there, and then some names I didn't know, which is excellent. And just, I love that this is, Wizards helped this. They didn't do it, which I would have loved if they'd done this to show us what people created and tell us about it. But they did say you can do this, right? They put it up there as an option, and Bianca, and with the editing of Kat Kruger, pulled these together. So we get to see all these submissions that people gave during that more open part of the challenge. So I'm really glad this exists.
Yeah. And you read them and you're like, wow, this one didn't win, or this one didn't win. What were the ones that won like, right? I mean, it's it's interesting to see the creativity of everyone in the hobby. So this just gives you a taste of what's out there.
Yeah, and one other thing that I'll mention before we close out news is there's been a huge success to this Kickstarter Tanaris RPG. Which is an RPG adventure and supplement for 5th edition. It's on Kickstarter. By the time you hear this, you'll just have a few days left to back. They are at one point almost 6 million raised so far. They've got a host of stars like Ed Greenwood and Amy Vorpal and Skip Williams and on and on. Rob Schwab, Jeff Grubb, that are all working on this. Shane Hensley. So if you haven't heard about this, it's worth checking out and see if this is something that interests you. We were contacted to see if we would mention it. And I think it is notable enough to mention for sure. Has some neat aspects.
Awesome. So that's out there on the Kickstarter. Now let's get into our main topic, which is the continuation of our Starting Strong theme, where we look at the hardcover books and adventures and check out how those adventures begin. And, in the past, we've talked about several of the books, starting all the way back from the original one. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
I mean, we had Lost Minds
Tyranny of Dragons,
covered, and then Tyranny of Dragons. Yeah.
Tyranny of Dragons, all the way from Tyranny of Dragons, that very first hardcover. We are now up to Storm King's Thunder and Tomb of Annihilation. So we're getting there. Yeah. So let's start with Storm King's Thunder. So these two are almost a contrast to each other, I feel. In terms of how they start. So for Storm King's Thunder, you open the book and you have to almost read a few chapters before you actually get to the start of the adventure.
And I'd be curious for listeners to tell us, do you like having a chunk that you read? Does that establish in your mind an understanding of everything, so that then you can run a better game? Or do you want to kind of get started and get that later?
Yeah, I mean, that is an important question. And for some designers, that is the question. Yeah. Because, for Storm King's Thunder, we get the introduction and it goes on for pages. Yeah, it really does. Some of these pages have very little art. It talks about the ordning. So almost right away, instead of here's what you do in the adventure, it's here's the ordning. This is the giant society's hierarchy. Why are storm giants at the top and hill giants at the bottom? And why might that change? So we get all this information before we know what the characters are actually going to do.
Things like the factions, right? And it has to do the work of introducing the factions in case you don't know what the 5 factions are and what they're up to. Yep. It's 18 pages before you get to where you're going to actually run something.
Right. And all of this information is interesting. Mm-hmm. The adventure concept is really deep and dynamic and cool. It doesn't, though, tell you how the characters are going to interact with this cool story. And that's something that, as long as it plays out somehow in the long run, is fine. But DMs, especially new DMs, might need to hear that information sooner. So that's how the book itself begins, until finally, several pages into it, you get to the actual running the adventure and adventure synopsis part. And for everything that you just heard, the adventure synopsis is actually pretty light, assuming that you're starting at first level.
Right.
It's like, okay, you go to this village and you go here. It's like one sentence tells you what's in each chapter. And I don't know if it expertly meshes the information you've already received with what's going to be in the adventure. I feel like after reading both of them, I'm still a little lost on, all right, as the DM, what am I actually running here?
Yeah, I agree. I thought the synopsis was, on one hand, good, but on the other hand, shallow and didn't truly capture what I needed to mentally prep. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of things like the flow chart too, where I've talked about this on my blog. It makes you think there are all these various choices, but there really kind of aren't. And so it almost like it creates a misunderstanding of what you'll flow through because of it's not getting, and for all the detail we got, I feel like it's strange that the adventure synopsis doesn't truly prepare me for, say, how they're going to wander around in chapter 3 through all these various quests and things like that, or how chapter 1 compares to chapter 2. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it falls into the trap of you have a grand story with machinations of giants and dragons and kraken, crackle, kraken, and right, and all of this, but never is there this impetus for the characters to care.
Yeah.
Right from the start. And you don't necessarily need to do that, but you need to let the DM in on the plan, in on the play. And it's not there. And the DM, if the DM does what they ask DMs to often do and read the whole thing, then you're like, oh, okay, here's how I could do it if I want to, but it's not right there.
And it says that it's sort of funny that at the beginning it says, you should read this completely before you run it. And it's like, great. Do you know how few people will do that? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. One way to look at this is an amazing adventure compared to, say, the Dragonlance series of old AD&D adventures, where you are clearly playing in someone else's world and you are so small compared to the story that you feel constantly like you're not as big as the actual story. And there's a series of Dark Zone adventures that are like this. And so here, the players are far more significant, far more tied to what's happening. But there are parts where that isn't true because it's such a big tale. And the DM isn't given enough. It's not called out, right? This is not an adventure that calls out its weaknesses and tells you how to deal with them, which it should.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's, if you go back to Tyranny of Dragons, right, it starts out, things are on fire, and you need to put them out. Even if you don't know the whole story, you've got an exciting call to action right there. For the adventure,
it feels concrete. Yeah. It feels like you're peeling back the layers, I think, in a more concrete, build-up level. One of my biggest things with this adventure is what will later happen after Chapter 2. Chapter 2 feels like you're priming the pump, and then you just drop it, and you go into this, go around and do various little quests things that diffuses that energy, and then it picks up again almost randomly.
Right.
And those are things that make it very difficult, I think, to have a very good run of this adventure. And certainly I was one of the playtesters way back then, and this was something that, even at that stage, it was true that it was hard to feel that energy growing, because we talked about this with rhyme too. If you tell me that there's a horrible unending rhyme and I'm making a character and I'm a hero, what do I think I'm doing?
Right.
I want to do that, right? I want to stop the giants. And if you tell me that nobody's talking about giants all of a sudden, but we were just attacked, what's next? Yeah, somebody wants you to deliver some wine to this village. No, I want to go fight giants and stop this and do something and be heroic. And
yeah, exactly. So let's jump forward and look at the actual adventure that you are set upon at first level. It is a town called Nightstone, I believe. Yes. So right away, they give you several potential reasons for going to Nightstone. Perhaps you've heard rumors of goblins in the area, and a Waterdavian noble is the steward of Nightstone, and so maybe she's offering a reward for anybody dealing with the goblins, or Nightstone is a retreat for wealthy nobles from Waterdeep, and so you can earn money by offering services as guards during a hunt. Okay. There's an enmity between the elves of the Ardeep Forest and the residents of Nightstone. And so the steward, Lady Velrosa, is looking for mediators to help do this, to help settle this dispute. Or Nightstone Inn is an amazing inn with great food and comfy rooms, and the innkeeper there always asks adventurers to do something for him. All of those are fine. None of those are great.
No.
All they are reasons for you to be in a certain place at a certain time, and they have nothing to do with giants. They have nothing to do, and you don't need to spell out the plot of the whole adventure right now, but have it related to what is happening. By the end of the story, you want it to tie back to the beginning.
And I think that's because this is an adventure that, one of its flaws is it doesn't know what it's doing fully. It hasn't committed.
Yep.
Because it has information that the various factions are hearing about giants. So and there's always this tension of, wait, are the giants flat out attacking or are they not? Are people aware or not? Should your heroes be aware? Because if they're aware, then they want to be heroes and solve stuff. And again, we see that tension here. We're not exactly sure what the players should know and how their motivations should be set up.
Right. Now, what happens when they arrive at Nightstone is that there has been an attack, giants dropping boulders from their cloud castle onto the city, and they steal this obelisk. Then they leave, and the goblins, aforementioned goblins, come in and start to ransack the city because the residents of the city fled to a cave that the goblins were using as a lair. Yeah. Okay, so start off with a cloud castle was seen flying over Nightstone.
Go check
it out. And nothing's been heard from them since. Yeah. Boom. Now you have everything you need. You've got your giant connection. You've got the impetus to go there and to stay on this track of giants throughout.
Yeah. It's funny that wasn't an option. And really, that's such a good start. You don't then need any other options, right? Just someone hires you to follow up on this rumor that somebody saw this cloud castle attacking. And yeah, and as it is, it's a little confusing, and it's okay. This part, I like actually a lot of how Nightstone is written.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of it is very clever how it works for a low-level party. But yeah, it's just that start is a little shaky, and it can create this confusion where you don't understand, are these goblins and ogres part of a giant threat? And you could possibly even go through it all and not quite understand what took place here.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. You want to, as the DM, make sure that you let the characters know somehow, whether it's through investigation or through NPCs, that this is what the giants did. And the goblins are just sort of taking advantage of a harsh situation. But the actual adventure within the town itself, I liked.
Yeah,
I liked all the small pockets of goblins moving here and there. You might, as the DM, need to move things along a little bit more quickly because there are a lot of areas and a lot of individual or pairs or trios of goblins. And if you sort of do every single one, it could be, okay, you fight 3 goblins. Oh, you fight 2 goblins. Oh, you fight 3 goblins. Oh, you fight 2 goblins. And you could do that like 10 or 12 times in a row.
It is made better by how well it's done. I mean, goblins are all given names, though we aren't quite given non-combat resolution, but they have names, and they're often doing absurd things like 2 goblins chasing chickens, or 2 of them with pumpkins on their heads playing a game of blind tag, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's why I love it.
Yeah.
And so, as the DM, you almost might want to just pick out 3 or 4 of these, and then after those 3 or 4, the rest of the goblins figure out what's going on, and they flee and lead the characters to the caves, so you can move on without it becoming a little too repetitious.
And there's some aspects that get a little hairy, maybe, like there's this specter, but that should be okay because it's only if you mess with a grave that you probably should know not to mess with. Right. And it's confined by the graveyard. We have a Zentarum spy. That angle is sort of fairly open, which I think this adventure actually does fairly well, that it has a couple of open elements in this first starting part that do seem to have the right pieces and the right phrasing so that I think most DMs will have a good result with it.
Yep, I agree. And you could even tie that Zentarum element into something giant related, depending on the direction that you want to take your game.
So then your second level.
Yeah, so then your second level and the goblins and the ogres are holding many of the villagers hostage in the Dripping Caves, and the trail pretty much leads you there.
And we have two events, though.
Tell me about the two events. One being the Zentarum.
Yeah, so you can find this Zentarum spy who's kind of picking off goblins in one area, and how you resolve that, you may kill them or work with them or kidnap them, and then a little bit later, at some point just after you've cleared up the goblins, become second level, a bunch of Zents arrive. And they're here to take over the town. They've been sent a message by this spy. And one of them is, in fact, in love with this spy. So there's all this possible tension that can play out in different ways, depending on what you think about the Zentarum, what happened with the spy that you did or didn't find. So a lot of open play, but I think the DM is given what they need to resolve it. And at some point, you're going to have to figure out a way past these Zentarum.
Yeah.
If you go to the keep and you meet the guards there, they have opinions. They don't want the Zentarum. In fact, the Zentarum will ask you to off the guards. So there's a lot of interesting tension here. Right. Then there's another piece that I don't think I would run this because it feels a little repetitive. It's not bad, but these group of orcs called Ear Seekers are escaping from elves. They kind of got hurt by them, and so they decide, oh, look, that town, let's go there, and that's where we can mount our stand. And you get this wounded chief, 20 orcs, and an Orc Eye of Grumsh, which is significant for second-level parties. Yeah. But we're given some guidance of basically, it's sort of, again, like the goblins, spread them out and let the players sort of create their ambush. And so that might be super fun, or it might not be, depending on how you're feeling about, your desire to get going. But at the end of one or two of these events, you then reach third level, and then you go to those Dripping Caves.
Right. And, as Teos said, as the DM, you sort of want to get a feel for your party. If you just spent 4 to 8 hours offing goblins, you don't want to spend another 4 to 8 hours picking off orcs, probably. Now, maybe that's exactly what your group loves. And if that's the case, go for it. But if you're like many groups that I have seen, talked with, and dealt with recently, you don't have as much time to play as you used to, and you sort of want to progress through the adventure at a pretty decent clip and level up at a pretty decent clip and take in the story. And so if you're going to do that, you can use that, but cut it down to, the wounded chief and 10 orcs, and they all attack at once, or
if it had been more of a siege defense type thing, it might have, I think, been different enough. But but it's
exactly there. Yep. And then for me, that covers what I want to cover about the beginning of adventures. But since it is supposed to lead you to fifth level, third level, there is the Dripping Caves. You get the prisoners, lots of information. Negotiation is possible, so it's cool there. And then you're at fourth level, there's the Tower of Zepharos, which can, he's a cloud giant who wants to help the PCs, and will take them to their next place if they agree to help in the investigation of what's going on.
Yeah, and we have some encounters that can, again, happen during travel, 1 to 2. You can have some Cult of Air people, which ties into Princes of the Apocalypse, who are trying to get the favor of evil cloud giants. Oops, they're at their own castle. Then the other side of things, good dwarves are dropped off by a silver dragon to attack this cloud castle and disable it. And so you have to sort of convince them that this is a good giant and all this. I can see some problems with... I could see both of these being a little difficult for DMs to run with the amount of information given. But they can also be fun if you want them, or you could just, go straight to where they're going. But they're going to be fifth level at the end of this, so you probably need a reason to explain how they became fifth level.
True.
What Zepharos does well, I think some DMs have found this a little too fantastic, and sort of a little jarring. This cloud castle shows up to take you somewhere, but what it does do is establish that there is clearly a different perspective between different giants, and that's an important thing to establish early on, that it's not like just all giants are attacking there's a variance of opinions, and maybe if you can find some that align with you, that would pay off. So I think that is useful that this shows up.
It's definitely important information to deal with a giant early in the adventure to just make it clear sort of what's happening on a meta level.
Yeah.
So after I read over this I ran the first couple levels of this, and then now reading it over again, I'm beginning to wonder if there is any one ideal way to lay out information in a big adventure, because it feels like if there's too little information, there's a problem. If there's too much information, there's a problem. If it's too linear at the beginning, well, I don't know if it can be too linear at the beginning. If it's not linear enough at the beginning, there's a problem. If it's too linear and doesn't allow choices, then so it's always a moving target. I feel like that we're trying to hit, and I think with shorter adventures, there is sort of an ideal way to do it.
Yeah.
With large adventures, I just don't know. I think so much depends on the theme of the adventure, the tone of the adventure, and the content of the adventure.
Well, I think what I would say is that you start choosing your approach, and then it's important to look at whatever that approach is and think to yourself, what's my impact on my DM?
Yes.
So it's not that there's one only way to do it, but I think that if you look at this adventure, to run Nightstone through Tower of Zepharos, you don't need that much world information. And so you could have actually made it a really short intro, gotten into the action, and then hit people with more info after this, so that a starting DM could literally just run this if that's all they want to run. But hopefully their group gets hooked and they feel confident and they do a great job. And now they want to read the Bible of the story of old giants and the Ordning and all those kinds of things, and the Zentarum and other factions, and then get into the bigger thing, right?
Yeah. Now, during my skimming, I may have missed it, but the cloud giants that attacked and then took the obelisk, they never said why they took the obelisk in the early adventure, did they?
I think they say that they believe it may be an artifact from the lost...
the
lost Astoria?
Yeah. Astoria. Okay. Yeah. But does it come up later, or is that just...
I don't recall that.
Okay. Because if it does come up later, that's a point where you as the designer need to just put in parentheses, as the characters will see in chapter blank, this obelisk is now being used to blank. Right. Just to make that, you don't need to spell out the whole story of it, but just point to why the giants actually took the time to attack this and whether it was, whether it's important, important in the long run, because that's a clue that the characters can then, it can help drive them through their choices in the adventure.
Yeah. So listeners, and or Will Doyle, Stacey Allen, if you know where this obelisk went, let us know. Yeah. Because I've lost track of that. This beginning part was not there when I ran my adventure as a playtest. So this part is something I've read but not ran.
Gotcha. Cool. So that's Storm King's Thunder. It's beginning.
Yeah, and can I just say that there's the other way you can start off this adventure is by running other adventures. Where if you run Lost Mines, it works fine, but they give you this advice for running other adventures that's sort of like, here's how to abandon the adventure you're running and switch to this one. Yeah. And I don't know if that was clever or not. Maybe it is, because maybe it's one of those things where you're running an adventure and you don't super love it and you want a way to jump aboard. But I didn't find the advice was super compelling to me or super useful. It felt a little like, here's how to switch train tracks in a convoluted way, or I don't know. It wasn't smooth. It didn't. Yeah, I didn't love it. The only thing I did like is they have ideas for bringing the elemental cults into the adventure. I thought that was pretty useful advice. But yeah. Cool.
All right, so now let's talk about Tomb of Annihilation. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, this is sort of the polar opposite of what we just saw. For Storm King's Thunder, there was chapter after chapter, or section after section of the backstory of what's going on in the background, Whereas with Tomb of Annihilation, it's sort of just stated bluntly right up front, in a very short way. The introduction gives the premise of the adventure. Hey, there's this death curse. People who have been brought back from the dead via raised dead resurrection, they're dying. And here's an important NPC who hires you to fix the problem because she's dying. Yeah. Boom. It's all clear. It's all there. The characters, right from the first moments of this campaign, know what their goal is.
Yeah.
That's super powerful as a storyteller, as a game master, as an adventure designer, to get everybody aboard and know what they're doing, because then they are motivated to make the choices that lead them to fulfill that goal.
I like that aspect a lot. I'm biased. This is my favorite 5e adventure because it hits all my buttons. It's like it was written custom for me. It's the kind of thing I like. And so I often, also I think its weaknesses are things that I handle easily. So I tend to think it's better than it maybe is. I think was what some other DMs might think. But one thing that is rough about the beginning is while it gets started quickly in terms of you go to Portney and Zaro, you go to Chult, you're there. It then has that problem of you're in town and there are all these options. So you're in town, there are all these merchant princes you could talk to. There are all of these quests. We get like 10 quests. We have the city with all of its locations. We have all of these guides that you could possibly meet. And I think that's where a DM suddenly does have to do that heavy reading to pick out what they should do. And I just feel like this adventure could have had yes, you're arriving to this location and there's going to be all this info that you can turn to, but here are these first 3 quests. And then the next 5 that you can choose from. And after that, choose from any of these others. And here is the initial set of maybe 2 guides that you can choose from that are going to take you to nearby areas. And then later, more guides that you can choose from to go into later. And that would help you get out into the jungle in a more orderly fashion, give the DM more time to prep.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, hey, there are these cool dinosaur races. What does that have to do with the death curse? Absolutely nothing. So as the designer, as the DM, make it something they have to do in order to get a clue to where to go next. Yeah. And you can give lots of choices. You can say, this NPC has the next clue. This NPC will give you this clue one of 3 ways. Win the dinosaur race, rescue this person from jail who's innocent, or this third thing. Then boom, you have the choice as the DM. The players have a choice if you want to present it, but then they know what the clue is to the next thing. And as Teos said, it goes in an orderly fashion where you can control what the pace is going to be and you can control it. You know when the leveling is going to happen and you can control it. And it doesn't take that much more work. If you have all of this great content and fun stuff to do, take that next step of just putting it into an orderly fashion for the DM.
And the same thing with the death curse, like you're saying, that ticking clock is at odds with super fun things like go to the dinosaur races. And I think that if the death curse had been described as it's kicking in versus it's fully here,
right,
that would, then there'd still be this urgency because something really horrible is going on. I mean, we can't raise people, and people who have been raised are withering. That's great, but it's almost to the point where you feel like your employer is just going to die, and you should race as quickly as you can to try to save people. I mean, if you care about people at all, which, I mean, you're heroes, you're supposed to, then you don't have any time for races.
Yeah. Yeah. And the important thing with the ticking clock is that the players get to see the clock. Right? If you don't show the players the clock, the ticking clock doesn't mean anything because they don't know how much time is ticking away. And the players don't know that they have 79 days to save their employer.
Yeah, that's the thing is, as written, you're going to spend a long time going through the jungle. And so one of the things that can happen is you just feel like you're a failure. you have yet again another set of weeks walking through the jungle where you did something important, but it wasn't solving the death curse. And if you felt like, well, we don't know when the death curse is getting worse, but it seems like it's getting worse. But we have time. We have time to gather information before it gets worse. Let's go out there and find what we can do. And as we get these clues, oh, look, now the death course has reached another stage. It's clearly accelerating. All right, take what you've found and act on it. Then that's a little better pace, right? And I wrote a supplement on the DM's Guild because of that, based on what I did when I ran it, because this was a big problem. If I had just done it as written, it would have been very jarring for that experience.
Yeah. One of the things I like as a DM and as a designer, and as a player even, for published material, is to have the very first encounter, like combat encounter of the campaign, be a scripted one, not one that the DM is making up on the fly. And that's what Tomb of Annihilation does, right? It's got this really strong call to action and really defined goal, and then it's, well, important Anzaro, you can really do anything, and here's a thug who will attack you, here's a gladiator who, if you best, will join you. But that's not, depending on the DM, that could be the most anticlimactic thing. I want that first taste to really tie everything together and move it in the right direction, and reinforce the theme. And the very first combat involves somebody who's dying from the death curse. Okay, and then you get a clue from them. Make it memorable. Make it something that really stands out.
Yeah, and there's some great parts of this adventure. I love all of the pirate piece, which is this whole auxiliary portion that's over on one side of the map. And you can have so much fun with that, but again, it's not corroborating it. None of it aligns with your mission, so it's a sidetrack. But it could be aligned, and it would have been great if they had given you just those little pieces of information you need to align it. Right? What do the pirates know about the Thayans, for example? So in my campaign, I wove together the pirates with the Thayans. The Thayans were manipulating the pirates. And you could learn about the death curse through understanding what the pirate and their Thayan influencers were doing, which then tied into when you get to the city where you see Thayans, that then has a lot of payoff, because you've been seeing this Thayan involvement and you're now understanding the implications of it.
Yep. And I loved everything from Omu on. In this adventure, I loved, and that's where I started. I ran something else, got the characters to 5th level, and boom, they were in Omu, and they were, tracking down the cubes and dealing with the Yanti, and then into the Temple of the Nine Gods, and here we go. And
both you and James Intercasso have adventures that can start you off to bring you here to change up the depth. Those can be found on the DM's Guild. I adore this adventure. This is one of my favorite adventures across any edition, certainly for 5e, but I love all of what this gives. It has weaknesses, but again, they align with what I can handle, and so I have trouble criticizing this because I do adore it so much. So I think hopefully this is an example to listeners of, we may criticize something while loving it dearly. And
this isn't criticism. This is just a discussion of different ways to come at the beginnings of adventures and things that we like, and as DMs, as designers, as players, different ways you can handle it. So any other thoughts on the beginning of Tomb of Annihilation?
Did I say that I really like Tomb of Annihilation?
I believe you said that you really did enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's good. So we only have 4 adventures left. Could it be true that we only have 4 adventures left to discuss the strong starts of Waterdeep Dragon Heist, Acquisitions Incorporated, Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, and Icewind Dale Ram of the Frostmaiden? So we will cover those hopefully in the next couple of episodes. Yeah. And you listeners out there, thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us every week. We hope we are entertaining and informing you up to the standards that you have for us. If you would like to support the show monetarily, you can via Patreon. by going to patreon.com/MMP. Teos, where can people find you on the social media stuffs?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at AlphaStream, and my latest blog post on alphastream.org is arguing about whether the DCs of things, for example, picking a lock, should stay static or scale as you level. And that has been fun to discuss with people on the internet.
I have heard that discussion going on for 3 probably years now. Yeah. If not before that, just I didn't know that I was hearing that discussion. And it is always interesting and fun to hear different people's takes, except from Mike Shea. Mike, we don't want to hear it.
Yeah, he's so wrong about everything. It's amazing. But,
we don't want to hear it anymore.
No, but the funny thing is Mike and I actually very closely aligned. But it's one of those things where when you how you say a few things about this issue can throw one person rapidly to the other. It's almost like suspension of disbelief, right? When one little thing comes into the equation, someone will go, no, I cannot have that in my game.
Right. Everything's fine except this, and that can't be, you can't have that.
Yeah.
And
that's why I like this issue, because I think it's one that, gets you thinking about the design of things you do. So anyway, So go to alphastream.org and check out Teos' blog and leave him angry comments. Where do we find you, Shawn?
Oh, you could find me in the fetal position under my desk, or on Twitter at Shawn Merwin. You can also go to the forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com to discuss anything and everything that we talk about here. Or if you want to follow the podcast itself on Twitter, the tag is at Mastering DND. And Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production. So, Teos, now that we have braved giants and the jungles of Chult, what should we do now?
Let's ride a cloud castle right back to Chult and have some fun there with some dinos.
Some zombie spewing, undead dinosaurs. Everyone's favorite. Bye-bye.